Chapter 9, The Growing Tension. Grace tried to shake off the lingering questions about Simon as the week progressed, but they seemed to follow her like a shadow. She was more aware of him now, how he moved through the office with an easy confidence, how he seemed to know things that others didn't, and how people responded to him with a deference that she hadn't noticed before. The weekend had offered her some clarity. While she enjoyed the time with her daughters, her thoughts kept drifting back to Simon. There was an undeniable attraction between them, a connection that went beyond mere physical chemistry. But there was also a growing sense of unease, a feeling that she was missing something important about him. By Monday, Grace had resolved to maintain her professional demeanor, even as the tension between her and Simon simmered beneath the surface. She knew she couldn't afford to let her emotions cloud her judgment, especially when it came to work. As the day unfolded, Grace found herself in a series of back-to-back meetings. The office buzzed with activity, the hum of productivity filling the air. It was the kind of environment where she thrived, focused, driven, and in control. But even amidst the chaos, Simon remained a constant in her thoughts. It wasn't until the afternoon that their paths crossed again. Grace was heading to the elevator when she saw Simon standing by the entrance, talking to a woman she didn't recognize. The woman was attractive, with sleek blonde hair and a figure-hugging dress that emphasized her curves. She laughed at something Simon said, her hand brushing his arm in a way that made Grace's chest tighten. Simon glanced up and noticed Grace, his expression unreadable. The woman followed his gaze, and her smile faltered slightly when she saw Grace approaching. There was a brief, almost imperceptible shift in the woman's demeanor, something that Grace couldn't quite place, but didn't like. "Grace," Simon greeted her with a warm smile, as if nothing were amiss. "This is Rachel. She's with our marketing team." Grace nodded, offering Rachel a polite smile. "Nice to meet you." Rachel returned the smile, though there was a flicker of something in her eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or maybe even competition. "You too, Grace. I've heard a lot about you." Grace wondered what exactly Rachel had heard, but she kept her tone neutral. "All good, I hope." "Of course," Rachel replied with a small laugh. "Simon speaks very highly of you." There was a subtle emphasis on Simon's name that made Grace's stomach twist. She wasn't sure if it was intentional, but it was enough to make her feel a pang of unease. "We were just discussing some ideas for the new campaign," Simon said, smoothly steering the conversation back to work. "Rachel's been doing some great work on it." Grace nodded, though her thoughts were elsewhere. She couldn't help but notice the way Rachel looked at Simon, the way her eyes lingered on him, the way she leaned in just a little too close. It was clear that Rachel was interested in more than just Simon's professional contributions. "Well, I'll leave you to it," Grace said, forcing a smile. "I'm sure you'll come up with something brilliant." As she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel was watching her, assessing her. It was a sensation she hadn't felt in a long time, one that made her feel like she was back in high school, competing for the attention of the most popular boy in class. But this wasn't high school, and Simon wasn't just any boy. He was a man with secrets, a man who had caught her attention in ways she hadn't expected. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and deadlines, but Grace found it increasingly difficult to concentrate. Her mind kept drifting back to Simon and Rachel, to the way they had looked at each other, to the tension she had felt in the air. By the time the workday ended, Grace was exhausted, physically and emotionally. She gathered her things and headed to the elevator, hoping to slip out of the office without running into anyone. But as the elevator doors opened, she found herself face to face with Simon. "Heading out?" he asked, his voice warm and inviting. Grace nodded, too tired to put up her usual defenses. "Yeah, it's been a long day." Simon stepped into the elevator with her, and they rode down in silence. The confined space seemed to amplify the tension between them, and Grace could feel her pulse quicken. When the doors opened, Simon turned to her, his expression softening. "Grace, are you okay? You seem distant." She hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. She didn't want to admit that Rachel's presence had bothered her, that the thought of Simon with another woman had stirred emotions she hadn't anticipated. I'm fine, she replied, forcing a smile. Just a lot on my mind. Simon studied her for a moment, as if trying to read her thoughts. You know you can talk to me, right? About anything. There was something in his tone, something genuine, almost tender, that made Grace's resolve waver. For a brief moment, she considered telling him everything, laying bare the doubts and fears that had been swirling in her mind. But then she remembered the way Rachel had looked at him, and the wall she had carefully built around her heart snapped back into place. I appreciate that, Grace said, her voice steady. But I'm okay. Really? Simon didn't press further, but there was a hint of disappointment in his eyes. All right. But if you ever need to talk. Grace nodded, grateful for his understanding, but also painfully aware of the distance that had suddenly opened up between them. As they exited the building, Grace was about to head to her car when Simon stopped her. Grace, wait. She turned to face him, her heart skipping a beat. Yes? There's something I've been meaning to ask you, Simon began, his voice hesitant. But I'd like to spend more time with you, outside of the office. Maybe we could grab dinner sometime? No work, no pressure. Just us. Grace felt a flutter of excitement in her chest, but it was quickly tempered by the reality of their situation. She wanted to say yes, to explore whatever it was that was building between them. But the uncertainties, the complications, those still held her back. I don't know, Simon, she replied softly, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts. I'm not sure if that's a good idea. Simon nodded, his expression understanding but tinged with disappointment. I get it. But if you ever change your mind, the offer's open. Grace gave him a small smile, appreciating his patience. Thanks, Simon. I'll think about it. As she walked to her car, she couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions, regret, uncertainty, and a lingering hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way to navigate the complexities of their relationship. But for now, she needed time to think, time to process, and time to figure out what she really wanted. And as she drove home, the image of Simon's hopeful expression stayed with her, a reminder that some things were worth the risk. Click follow for the next chapters.